Hey everyone, you're listening to another episode of the All Things Private Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick.Casale. I'm joined today by a repeat guest and friend, Michael Fulwiler. He's the director of brand at 𝗁𝗲, the financial back office for therapists, and the host of 𝗁𝗲 Business School, a new show for therapists building their own businesses. Also the creator of Therapy Marketer, a popular newsletter for therapists, and was previously the chief marketing officer at the Gottman Institute. Michael, it's good to have you on. We're going to talk a little bit today about a pretty extensive and well-researched and detailed financial report that 𝗁𝗲 ran on analytics in terms of the financial forecast for private practice owners, and kind of do some deep diving into what we think is happening behind the scenes. So thanks for coming on. Did I miss anything on your bio? And tell us a little bit about why this report feels really significant for the private practice world.
Bio was great. Thanks, Patrick, for inviting me back on the show. This report is the output of a national survey that we conducted. It's actually the second year that 𝗁𝗲 has done this report. 2 years ago, we surveyed therapists nationwide, and it was the first time that we did it. And I thought it would be cool if 100 therapists responded, because I didn't know if therapists would be open to the idea of responding to a survey about their finances. We had 1,200 responses to the survey, which was pretty amazing. And I think just like a really great indicator and signal that therapists are interested in this type of information, which isn't generally publicly available, right? Like, what's the average profit for a therapy practice by state? How much are, therapists making from insurance companies, and like, which insurance company pays the most? Like, those kinds of questions were things that we were really interested in. So we did this report 2 years ago for the first time. We decided to do it again. This past year, we had 2,268 responses to our survey, which was up 87% year over year, which was, really exciting and really a representative sample of therapists across the country. We had responses from all 50 states, including Washington, D.C., social workers, psychologists, mental health counselors. So really a wide range and some pretty interesting data.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about money and therapy, they don't seem to always go hand in hand, especially in terms of comfortability about talking about this stuff, which is always fascinating to me, especially when we're talking about private practice ownership opposed to community mental health therapy. Because I'm like, well, if we're in private practice, we have to treat our business like a business. And I know how uncomfortable it is for so many of you that are listening to talk about money, to raise your fees, to talk about rate increases, to enforce certain policies and procedures. And I understand it's very nuanced. It's not just black and white. So what is some of the stuff that really stood out to you guys when you kind of took these reports and took a look at them? Like, what are some of the main points that were like, oh, that's pretty illuminating?
Something that stood out to me was 89% of therapy practice, and I should clarify, these are private practice owners. So 89% of private practice owners that we surveyed reported that they made less than $100,000 in profit. So that's income after expenses. I think there's this like conception that therapists make a lot of money. When you look at therapists charging 150 to, the general public, maybe not therapists,
Yes.
but people think, wow, like therapists must just be rolling in the dough. They're charging 150, 200, $250 a session. But in reality, of the therapists that we surveyed, at least, and again, that's over 2,000 therapy practice owners, only 10% are making six figures after expenses. And that number was actually down year over year. So that was 2023 financial information. If we look back to 2022, so when we surveyed 2 years ago, 65% of therapists made less than six figures. So this percentage of therapists that we surveyed, year over year went down in terms of their profit, which I think is interesting. A takeaway for me, or how I interpret that data, is that expenses are up for a lot of therapists. We also asked year over year? Like, have your expenses gone up? And over 50% of therapists said yes. Yet when we asked therapists if they have raised their fees to keep up with inflation and, rising interest rates, only 33% of therapists actually raise their fees. So it's just math, right? Like if your expenses are going up, but your fees aren't going up, your profit is going down.
Yep. Yeah, it's a fascinating paradigm, because you would think to keep up the cost of inflation and market costs and just cost of living, that's why so many therapists, and I imagine a lot of you listening, have fee increase verbiage in your informed consent, annual fee increase verbiage. But how many of you actually increase your fees? How many of you get to November, December, and you think, I don't know if I can go up this $10 an hour. I feel like my clients aren't able to make that work for them. I also think we're seeing a large number of tech companies and marketing companies and online platforms come into the field. So that's kind of impacting where clients are ending up in terms of landing spots for therapy. So there are all these things that you have to combat. But a lot of this is, when I say cultural, I mean cultural professionally, where the profession in itself, I bet if you polled, I don't know if this was a question you asked, but it might be one to ask next time and include, is like, how many of you have business training? And I imagine that the percentage would be quite low, maybe like less than 10%. So helpers in the industry of like relational work and support and holding space, but with very little business acumen and very little understanding of how to keep the lights on, besides like, I know I just see X amount of clients a week and that's just how it goes. And I don't know how to really like track consistent income. I don't know how to plan for the future. I don't know how to like plan for PTO. All of these things that go into running a business and really, getting out of the black, so to speak, and definitely avoiding the red.
Definitely. Yeah. And there's the emotional component of it as well, right? Like, I think it's easy to think about like the practicality of my expenses are going up. I need to increase my fees to maintain my profit margins. But when you're talking about clients who are people who, they may not be able to afford if you increase your rate. So whether that's reality or not, maybe that's just a mindset that maybe there's a little bit of a scarcity mindset there of like, if I increase my fees by $10 or $20, I'm going to lose all my clients, when in reality, that probably isn't the case, maybe in some cases. But I think there's that as well, which just adds to the nuance and difficulty of it. So, I don't want to shame anyone for feeling, worried or scared about raising their fees. And when you think about it as a business, it just makes sense, right? And it's something that, if you don't do, you're going to essentially be taking a pay cut.
Yeah. And I think about what you're saying is absolutely correct. Like it's the industry of relational work. You're working with people. There's a power dynamic. Ultimately, we've been kind of conditioned in graduate school and community mental health jobs, and even in the field in itself, that you don't get into this field to make money. You're not going to profit. You can't help people and be profitable at the same time, which is just utter bullshit. But like that's a really deeply entrenched belief. So it's really hard to unpack that without feeling guilt and shame and shying away from these conversations. Because, and again, you mentioned like which insurance companies pay the most. Insurance companies have a situation where they have created so much fear in conversation around rate setting so that nobody knows what anyone else is being paid. And nobody even knows how much their CPT codes are going to pay them before they even sign the contract. A lot of the time, you don't even have the fee schedule until after you sign the contract. And that creates this dynamic of like, I really can't talk about the money. Like this stuff is, this is taboo, which is unfortunate because it really does keep the profession playing a bit small in a way, because the profession is so valuable for society in itself. And I think when you start to examine this stuff and like start to unpack this stuff, it does allow you to have a different lens and perspective when you're thinking about your day-to-day operations, your month to month, your year to year, and starting to think about like, what are some of the goals that I have for myself as a small business owner? And I think that's really important to examine as well, because otherwise you're kind of just like going through the motions without a plan of action and just like throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Definitely. And when it comes to insurance, it's by design, right? My understanding is that when you get credentialed with an insurance company, it's part of the contract that you sign that you're actually not supposed to talk about what your reimbursement rates are. Like there's an NDA that you sign, which is, I think that's bullshit, right? Like it should be information and you should be able to make an informed decision about who you want to be paneled with. That was another, takeaway from this report for me as well, is we asked therapists, do you take insurance? My anecdotal sense is that more therapists are going cash pay, but actually the majority of therapists still take some form of insurance. 73% of therapists that we surveyed take some form of insurance. And therapists who take insurance are making less than therapists who are out of network, which is not surprising. The average reimbursement rate across the board, and this probably is skewed higher from therapists who are in California and New York and in cities, but the average insurance reimbursement rate of therapists surveyed was $122 per session, which is 25% less than the average cash pay rate, which was $157. So on average, if you're taking insurance, you're making at least 25% less than if you were, out of network.
Yeah, it's wild, right? And I'm just thinking about that number, and that seems pretty on the nose, being in North Carolina. I went to book a massage for my wife the other day, and like a 80-minute massage was like $140. So like when we're talking about 60-minute therapy sessions getting reimbursed at like, I don't know, $120, with all the education that goes into the licensure process, the supervision, the student loan debt, the importance of it, the fact that you only have so much capacity to see so many clients in a week as a solo practitioner. And it's just amazing how these rates can really prohibit us from staying in the profession long term. And we see such an intense level of burnout for a lot of reasons, not just money, but money plays a role. And it does lead to this almost shameful exodus from the profession, because so many people are like, I just can't do this. Like, I love the work, but I can't do this because it's not sustainable for me financially. I can't even pay my freaking bills, and I have a master's or a PhD. And I hear so many unfortunate stories of just people feeling like failures, or like, I should never have gotten this degree. I shouldn't have pursued this because this career path doesn't feel viable for me anymore.
And going back to raising your fees, with insurance, it's a little bit more difficult, right? Like you can go to an insurance company and try to renegotiate higher rates. But if you're not raising your rates, your cash pay rates, the only way to make more money if you're doing one-on-one therapy is to see more clients, right? So you're either charging more or you're seeing more clients. Like those are the two ways that you can make more money. And if you're not raising your rates and you're seeing more clients, that's a path to burnout.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a catch-22, right? Like, it's like, do I see more clients and overextend myself? Do I raise my rates? And do I struggle with that whole process? And I am, like you said, the mentality of like, if I raise my rates $10, $20, and it does not have to be for existing clients. Like, that's what I want people to hear right now, is like, it does not have to be a black and white process. It can be, you know what? I'm going to give my current clients 6 months for my rate increase, and I'm going to give them as much preparation as possible. Some of them may be able to do it, some of them may not. Those who may not, do I keep them on sliding scale? Do I get flexible? That's the beauty of being your own business owner. But then you can say, going forward, for any new clients, my rates are going to increase to this. So you can get a little bit more comfortable without having to completely dive into the deep end, in terms of just doing a blanket like overhaul. And for some of those of you who are listening, that may be the more comfortable scenario, instead of saying, I'm just doing this practice-wide. I think practice-wide works better because it's cleaner in a lot of ways, but also I understand that there are individualized circumstances within your practice. So I think you have to step back and do that evaluation, zoom out a little bit so that you can zoom in. because we're so often in our businesses, like working in our businesses instead of on our businesses. And we lose sight over like the granular stuff that is really going to be the sustainability long term. Because what I don't want to continue to see is talk to different therapists and practice owners who are like, I'm going into coaching. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go back to bartending. Like, there are so many of these stories, and it's really unfortunate because we do such valuable and meaningful work, yet we undervalue the work that we do because of the value incongruence in terms of the why behind why we got into this field in the first place. So it's really a nuanced conversation.
Definitely. And most therapists care a lot about accessibility. We asked, do you offer a sliding scale? Do you offer pro bono slots? And most therapists said yes. That number is 75%. Just wanted to make sure I get, so 3 and 4 do, right? I think the thing with sliding scale that you need to be careful of, and Tiffany McLean from Lean and Make Bank talks about this, that don't let sliding scale be a crutch for not charging your full fee, right? Like, if a client can't afford your full fee, absolutely, a sliding scale is great, but don't like undermine yourself and your value by offering everyone a sliding scale just because you don't feel worthy of charging your full rate.
Yeah, 100%. I've said this before on this podcast and other places, like, and this is so common, right? Like, when I first started my business, I was so desperate to get out of community mental health, and I really wasn't confident in myself as a business owner. People would call me, hey, I want to work with you. I found your information wherever. And before we even talked about money, I would already offer the sliding scale. I'd be like, my rate's $100 an hour, but I also have a sliding scale from like
whatever you can pay is fine.
Yeah. Even like, yeah, let's do 30. I'm like, and that was all on me for not being just confident and comfortable enough to talk about the money. And what would end up happening is some of these clients would come in and they would pay maybe $20, $30 a session. I was just happy to get it because I was like, it's still more than I was making at my agency job. But then we'd be talking in session and maybe they'd talk about a vacation or a new car or a new purchase. And I would find myself getting kind of resentful, not at them specifically, because it's not their fault that I agreed to this number, but at myself for saying like, why did I jump immediately to offering this reduced fee slot when it wasn't even asked for in the first place? And I think that's what happens to a lot of new clinicians, especially, is like this lack of belief that anyone's going to pay you for therapy, or understanding that people, value their money and where it goes in different ways. So we can't make blanket assumptions for every single person who calls you. A lot of people who come out of community mental health, where maybe you were working a lot with folks who were state funded, they had low resources, et cetera. So there's this assumption that that means everybody who's looking for therapy falls into one category, which is inaccurate. So it's just really about having a good understanding. And I think what a lot of therapists don't do, and we used to do this in my coaching programs, is like week 1, we would say like, okay, what's the number of that you need to make to keep the lights on, pay the bills? That's important. Like, you got to know that number. How many hours do you want to work a week to obtain that number, right? That's how we kind of create our rates. And then we need to know, what do I want to make? Like, what's ideal? How many weeks of time off do I want to have? Like, what's the quality of life I'm looking to pursue? That's how we inform our rates. Not like what ends up happening is people will post in Facebook groups, including my own, like, what's everyone charging for therapy? And you'll get 500 different answers. But the only way that those people who are responding have decided how they are going to charge their fees is doing the same thing, right? Like, so asking everybody else does not take into consideration your needs and what you, and your bills and your profit and your expenses and like the individualized situation. So you really do have to get more clarity when we're doing these things. Otherwise, you're just, again, flying by the seat of your pants without a plan.
100%. Yeah. I think, our goal for this report is to provide more transparency around finances and hopefully help therapists to benchmark what they're charging, what they're making, how they're doing compared to other practices. But you're absolutely right. Like, when it comes to setting your fee, what most people do is they'll go on Psychology Today or they'll go in a Facebook group and they'll look around and see what other people are charging. I've talked to therapists who, especially if they're newer to private practice, I look around, I see what other people are charging. I'm going to charge a little bit less, right? So it'll be more appealing. But you don't know what those therapists, their situations are, right? Like maybe they're supported by a partner and their practice is more of a hobby. And so they just charge lower rates to be more accessible. Like you have no idea their financial situation and where they're coming from. So it's more about you and your values and the lifestyle that you want to create for yourself and backing out of that.
Absolutely. And also, like, there is a negative in terms of psychology when we try to undervalue or undersell our services, right? So like, if you do go on site today, for example, and you're like, okay, everyone in my area charges 150. I'm going to charge 75. What ends up happening is clients will be scrolling through, and not every client, but a lot of clients will see 150, 150, 140, 125, 175, 75. The psychological implication and correlation that your mind makes is, ooh, that's not as good. This person's not as experienced. I'm not going to call this person. Like, so counterintuitively, you're already setting yourself up for a situation where you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by trying to have the best of intentions. So it's just really interesting when we start breaking money stuff down, especially in this profession.
Yeah, 100%. We had Jeff Gunther, who I know you're friends with as well, on our show, and he was talking about how he's had resistance to raise his rates in his own practice, because he feels like if he raises his rates, he needs to be like more serious as a therapist. He can't joke around and like bullshit as much because it's like, oh, if I charge this premium fee, I need to like button up and, be more legit, which like, fuck that, right? But that's just like I think the mindset and just where like the money stuff that comes up for people, right? Is like, oh, if I'm going to charge this premium fee, I need to like, be a more serious professional, when in reality, like, I think to your point, actually a premium fee can be a signal of a good therapist, right? And I know me personally, like if I'm looking not just for a therapist, but any service provider, I'm probably not going to go with the cheapest option just because to me that signals like lower quality.
Absolutely. And Jeff could charge $1,000 an hour because he has such a huge following. People would pay it just to spend time with him.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been in those situations too, where I've been struggling financially and I either had to rely on the shitty insurance that I had because I needed that $10 copay, or I had to go to like Open Path where, people were offering sessions from $20 to $60. And those were times in my life where that was a necessity. And now, I've had a therapist for about 3 years who's private pay. She raises her rates every year. And I find it so funny because she'll approach the fee setting like, okay, so it's January. I just want you to know that we're going from like 195 to 205 in 2 months. Is that okay? I'm like, just do it now. Like, can we just do this now? Because I want to help you do this. Like the $10 isn't going to make a difference at this point in my life. So, and I also understand I'm paying for a certain service and value. And I think there's so much liberation and freedom in having a private paid therapist who doesn't have to like do things specifically for insurance diagnostic purposes. So there's all of these ways to conceptualize it and make it work, but it's fascinating for sure. Let's pivot a little bit as we start to wrap up. So you work for a company that is really designed to help therapists sustain and thrive financially and get a better understanding of where the money goes and how to set themselves up for future success. Can you talk about that just briefly and how 𝗏 can help people who are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So when therapists go into private practice, many of them tend to feel very overwhelmed about the financial management of their business. Suddenly you need to be your own bookkeeper and accountant. You have to figure out, not just how much to charge, but what happens with that money after you charge it. Where does it go? Does it go into a business bank account or a personal bank account? And how do you pay yourself? And all of these questions of managing your financial back office. I think a lot of therapists understand their front office and have, an EHR that they do their scheduling and notes and documentation and all that. But when it comes to the back office, historically, it's been very cobbled together. Like therapists will have a spreadsheet and, they'll keep receipts in a drawer and they'll have like one weekend where they try to figure everything out before they go see their CPA to do their taxes. So, our goal at 𝗁 is really to streamline all of those, financial processes for your practice in one easy to use online platform. So we help therapists manage their bookkeeping on a monthly basis. We provide financial reports that are very simple and clear and easy to understand. On a quarterly basis, we help therapists estimate their quarterly taxes. And then annually, we prepare and file both business and personal taxes for therapists.
I like the one-stop shop idea, because I think, like you said, so many people are piecemealing it together, doing it themselves, or oh, I have familiarity with TurboTax from back in the day. And it's this is a bit different now that you have a business and you have deductions and you have contributions potentially. So you really need to know where that money's going. And for those of you listening, listen, I know there's a lot of shame in the money conversations, whether it's about retirement, whether about taxes, whether it's about fee setting. Give yourself a little grace in this. And just if we can just start new today with new habits, that will be really beneficial for you in your career. And that can mean hell, if you're not contributing anything towards retirement, $50 a week is better than nothing. If you're having a hard time with quarterly taxes or understanding bookkeeping or understanding your taxes in general, getting a CPA, getting a platform like 𝗁, getting someone in your corner to help you, it does not have to stay this way. And you can make these changes pretty immediately to set yourself up for future success. Michael, any last minute tips, suggestions, anything you want to share with anyone that's listening right now?
Yeah, one of the big takeaways for me from the report that's related to this topic is we asked therapists how they're doing their own bookkeeping, and 53% said that they do their own bookkeeping. Most are doing it using a spreadsheet. Some are using a DIY software like QuickBooks. But then we asked, how much time are you spending? And 52% of therapists are spending 2 hours or more per month doing their own books and managing their finances, which is over 20 hours a year, right? So when you think about it that way, as you think about yourself as a business owner, how much time are you spending on your business instead of in your business? And how much could you save by outsourcing or getting help or just getting your time back? And that's a big part, of what we do at 𝗁, is just give time back to therapists. They can make more money, or they can watch Netflix and relax, right? So I think, thinking about that too, of how much time are you spending on stuff you don't really want to be doing? And can you get help by outsourcing that?
Yeah, I love that. I think, I know this conversation today was more money focused, but time is our most important currency, right? It's the one we don't get back. For most of us who become private practice or small business owners, it's because you want more free time. It's because you want more autonomy. You want more control over your situation. So time for me is everything. I'd rather outsource things I don't know how to do or don't want to do so I can spend more time doing the things I want to do. And that typically leads to making more money in the long run, because then I can be more focused on the things that bring me joy instead of the things that I kind of either do not want to participate in or I'm just begrudgingly moving into. So really love that perspective for sure. Michael, tell the audience where they can find, I know you have a really cool newsletter, and then anything for 𝗁 that you want to share, and we will get it all in the show notes too.
Definitely. So we'll provide the link to download the report. It's a 35-page PDF. So definitely encourage you to read through it with, a cup of coffee or tea. Our website is joinherd.com. We have a ton of free resources and webinar recordings and other downloads, all about managing your finances for your business. So recommend checking that out. We just launched a new podcast you had mentioned earlier, 𝗁 Business School. Excited about that. Definitely want to get you on the show. We had Dr. 𝗛𝗲𝗿𝗲 as our first guest. So that's up on YouTube.
A good first guest.
Yeah, no, he's awesome. And then also, so personally I write, I have 10 things at all times, and you're the same way, I know. I write a newsletter for therapists called Therapy Marketer. So if you just put that into Google, you should show up. Hopefully I have good enough SEO. But yeah, that goes out every week if you're interested in learning more about marketing for your business.
Love it. And all of that stuff will be in the show notes so that all of you have easy access to everything Michael just listed. Mike, Thanks for coming back on, man. It's always a pleasure. It's been great just staying connected over the last couple of years, and congrats on all the success, and looking forward to coming on the podcast too.
Thanks, Patrick.
To everyone listening to the All Things Private Practice podcast, I almost said Divergent Conversations because I'm sleep deprived. New episodes are out on Saturdays on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share. Doubt yourself, do it anyway, and we will see you next week.